Today, I would like to examine a passage that is widely avoided by most pastors in the pulpit. And after we go through it, you'll probably understand why. Judges chapter 19. It contains a very interesting story. It's arguably the most gruesome and shocking story in the entirety of the Holy Scriptures. And this should come as no surprise to us, as the theme of Judges is, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, something I would like to challenge you to do with this story, and really any story in the Bible, is this. Ask why it's there. Why did God want this story in His Word? With that, let's begin. The story begins as all great stories do, by introducing a Levite who's going to fetch his concubine that had cheated on him. Now, the concubine had ran home to her parents in fear of punishment, so he was going to get her. The woman's father was happy to see the Levite and welcomed him in to stay for a few days, which he did. What was supposed to be an in-and-out mission turns into a 4-day ordeal because the father does not want him to go. But on the final day, the Levite is enticed to stay until afternoon, and this is important because it's a 1-day trip back to his hometown. So leaving in the afternoon means he won't make it in time if he leaves now. The Levite knows this, but he leaves anyway with his servant and his concubine. And as the night draws near, the Levite's servant proposes an idea. Why not let us stop here in Gibeah? But the Levite replies with disgust. We will not stay with those unclean people. We will go on until we reach God's holy people, the Israelites in Gibeah. He was afraid that those disgusting Gentile dogs would harm him, but he was confident that God's holy people would be much more suitable to stay with. So they pressed on and arrived at Gibeah. They went into the town center, but no one would invite them in, and it was getting late. But lucky for these guys, there was an old man returning from the fields that invited them in. And this is where things get hairy. After just a few moments of arriving at the man's house, the wicked men of the town gathered around the house and begin to pound on the door. For those of you who are familiar with the Sodom and Gomorrah story, this should be ringing some bells. The wicked men cry out, "Bring out the men who came to your house so we can have sex with them." Now, it's really starting to look like Sodom 2.0. There is really only one difference between the two stories, and that difference is important. Where is the angel of the Lord? So, the owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them to do whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night. And at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where the master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. Now you may not be able to resist asking the question, what just happened? The story does not imply any concern for the woman's health from the Levite. He appears to be completely apathetic to the situation. You would think the Levitical priest would have some empathy, but in fact, the story continues to get worse as the priest goes home and cuts her body into 12 pieces and mails them around Israel. So we must ask the basic question again, as you're probably already asking it. How did this story end up in the Bible, and why is it here? Remember the theme I mentioned earlier. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. I would also like to add another piece to the story, something that must be considered. This story lies at the end of Judges, which implies that this story must be at the end of the timeline. The stories throughout Judges have been getting progressively worse, all culminating to this final story showing that the Israelites have become as evil as Sodom. An Israelite who is reading this at the time would be thinking, wow, things have really gotten bad. I wish we could go back to when Moses was our ruler. But the Israelites are notoriously good at reminiscing at the past and thinking everything used to be better. Think back to when they were wandering in the wilderness and continuously complaining about their present situation and wanting to return to Egypt. They were never satisfied. Even when God made manna fall from heaven, they craved other foods. Meanwhile, the rabble among them had a strong craving for other food. And again, the Israelites wept and said, "Who will feed us meat? We remember the fish we ate freely in Egypt, along with the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt." So this is a common theme. Now, in the time of the book of Judges, the people would want to return to Moses, but while they were with Moses, they would want to return to Egypt. And this is where God's sense of humor comes in. Because if we look a little later in the story, in Judges chapter 20, verses 27 and 28, look at what it says. "And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it." As an Israelite, you see this and say, wait a minute, Phinehas? You mean Phinehas, the same one that was in the wilderness with Moses, Phinehas? That means that this horrible story that was supposed to be at the end of Judges actually happened back in the better days that they would have wanted to go back to. God baits them into it the entire book of Judges, then switches it on them with a slap in the face. God is making it so clear to them that there were no better days. You Israelites have always been rebellious and wicked. You always want to return to a time before, rather than focusing on making your current situation better. So what's the moral of the story? Stop looking to the past and thinking it was better. How often do we look to the past and envy what we used to have? It's interesting how people tend to look to the past and only remember the positive things, but while we're living in the present, we can't help but see all the wrong things with it. So here's the moral. Be thankful for today. Be better now. Learn to be content. It's funny because the story continues and gets progressively worse, but that's for another time. For now, I want you to look back and think of all of the times when you thought that it was better, and then think a little harder, because it probably wasn't.